said you died for me, give to me, give to me. Why won't you live for me, care for me, care for me? You said you care for me, there for me, care for me. Said you be there for me, cry for me, cry for me. You said you died for me, give to me, give to me. Why won't you live for me, care for me, care for me? You said you care for me, there for me, care for me. Said you be there for me, cry for me, cry for me. You said you died for me, give to me, give to me. Why won't you live for me?
DLB Pro.
Hello listeners and welcome back to the Song by Song podcast. I'm Martin Zoltz-Orstwick.
I'm Sam Pay.
I'm Ross Sutherland.
And from the Tom Waits album Rain Dogs, we're about to listen to Bride of Rain Dog. I really like this piece of music. Like, it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous, but still, despite this, like, atonality and, like, kind of jarring instruments, all this wavering vibrato happening, it still feels like a piece of music, like, against the odds. I really like it.
Yeah.
I want so much more of it. You know, like, I just
well, like
feel
10 minutes
that, like,
more.
that would be great. Just 10 minutes, even if nothing changed, nothing happened to it. I feel that, like, listening to it, just having to, like, keep licking it back to the top again and again and again to sort of like to try and stay in that moment a bit longer.
This is an artifact that appears in the music video for the track that comes previous to this, Downtown Train. You'll find in the show notes for last week's episode. The music video was starring Jake LaMotta, and the second half of Bride of Rain Dog appears over the prologue for the music video of Downtown Train, and then the first half of Bride of Rain Dog appears over the epilogue to the music video. It's quite difficult to describe, but once you've heard both Downtown Train and Bride of Rain Dog, and then you watch the music video, you'll understand what I mean.
So this is literal, like, factory floor sweepings. We're just taking the bits and bobs from other places and kind of...
Well, possibly, although I've always assumed that this was an outtake from recording Rain Dogs. Because we have the little key change. We start off weird. About 35 seconds into the track, you get the shifting chord, which takes us into what sounds very much like the lyric from Rain Dog. Oh, how we danced with the rose of Tralee. So I always thought that this was like a fragment or a different version, different arrangement. But the personnel on this is very different. You don't have Ribot. You have Michael Blair and Ralph Carney with Waits playing harmonium, which doesn't match up. So it must be its own thing, but I don't know why. Like, it doesn't have its own identity. It doesn't stand by itself. I don't really understand it.
Just this little curio. I'm still glad it's there, though. I like it as a little kind of intermission. And should I ever take up a career in clowning and need something to kind of play behind me for my big sort of like final number, I've definitely got it sorted. Basically,
I'm really worried what kind of clowning that would be.
I think it would be something about me having like an egg with a face on it, and me keep thinking like I've sat on the egg and crushed it, but then the egg is always okay. I think that's the routine in various kind of like extended forms.
I find that quite moving. It's really hard to know what to say about this track. I mean, I like its position in the album. Downtown Train very much feels like a pop song in the context of this record, and then he goes like, "Oh, if you thought I was a pop musician, just to make sure, here's Bride of Rain Dog." This is the kind of stuff I do this stuff too. Yeah. So I feel like it's a sort of statement about his like kind of avant-garde or hipster proclivities. Just in case you got the impression that he was one of the square songwriters.
It's a cred track, isn't it? It's something to establish credentials, quite literally. And it's interesting actually because the last few albums I've talked a few times about it feeling like he has the confidence to go in and out of all of these various different styles, that he's moved away from the concept album where he has one idea that he presents through 8, 10, 12 tracks, and instead he's going, here's a country song, here's a weird instrumental, here's shouting about the creatures that live beneath our feet, whatever I fancy. But this one feels very much like it has an agenda. It feels like it's trying to create this sense of weirdness for the album as a whole, like you say, reminding people that he is a crazy lunatic as well as a songwriter.
And is that something quite new to, because I've got huge gaps in my Waits discography, is that sort of new, sort of nowish, this idea of like difference is the unifying thing?
I wouldn't say
heading more that way.
I mean, I think the closest corollary this song has is Dave the Butcher on Sawfish Trombones, which is a sort of organ track. But I find this song a lot richer and more interesting. I think partly because it's a number of musicians kind of messing with each other on some level. I feel like it's musicians trying to be avant-garde but also kind of play together and create something that, if not melodic, has a sort of coherence to it. I don't know. I mean, I've never attempted to play this style of music, so I don't know what the synthesis of this kind of piece is actually like. Is it like a piece of free jazz? Is it like a jam? Like, I don't know.
The title is something that I think is interesting to note as well. Bride of Rain Dog feels to me very much like a reference to Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, it's sort of it's a joke, isn't it? It's a reference to Hammer horrors. Excuse me. I also wonder whether it's a reference to Kathleen. We haven't mentioned this, but the first co-written track between Tom Waits and his wife Kathleen Brennan appears on this album.
Really? Which one?
Hang Down Your Head. So that's interesting that he's, later on in his career, he's more explicit about her contribution to the process, and his, although I've never entirely understood what her role is in it, because he's very sort of elusive about it. But, if he is a Rain Dog too, then Bride of Rain Dog is Kathleen. That's a song about his wife.
It's interesting, though, because like it's a Bride of Frankenstein, is like 1935, 36, I think, and it's interesting because if you know the film, then you know that the Bride of Frankenstein is not a positive figure. That the bride is created by Frankenstein, the scientist, under duress, and by bringing her to life as the monster's bride, she immediately rejects him, and then the monster sort of commits suicide, sending the bride off for a happy life with possibility of a future, while he brings the he commits suicide by giant lever, basically by destroying himself. So I take what you mean, but a literal interpretation of the title is a much bleaker sort of bride.
You're my Bride of Frankenstein. It's just like, yeah, right. Even in a kind of ghoulish kind of like world, that's still ghoulish for ghouls.
It's pretty dark.
I don't know. I think it's more of a poking fun at his sound. Like Rain Dogs sounds like a weird Frankenstein like amalgam of real music. I mean, it's angular and it's odd and it's deliberately jarring. And this is a piece of music that presumably they wrote, they didn't know what to call it, and they're like, well, it's like a kind of weird, offshoot of Rain Dogs. It's in the same universe, and Bride of Rain Dogs is a, in the same, like you say, Bride of Frankenstein is another, Frankenstein's monster, but with lipstick. So I guess that's what Bride of Rain Dog is.
You could have called it Rain Dog's Revenge, or
Dawn of the Rain Dogs. Yeah. Maybe the wrong era for
that. Rain Dogs Go to Monte Carlo.
Yes, very good. Rain Dogs 2, Operation Moscow would be my...
Rain Dogs European Vacation.
We're coming towards the end of the album, and with this instrumental, we want to take the opportunity to listen to another Marc Ribot track, but really focusing on one of Ribot's other collaborators. So for this week's info track, we have the John Zorn track Gevura.
It's got such a amazing groove to it. Is that a really like sad dad thing to say when you come into a room and someone's playing some cool music?
No, not with Marc Ribot. That's not a sad dad. That's a cool dad.
Yeah, it's got such a great groove, and for me, there's something about it which feels so incredibly precise and yet so effortless. All the time I was hearing it, I was thinking about it like playing over a kind of a scene in a movie where it's a bunch of people planning a kind of casino heist, right? Where everybody's doing their own thing and they're all experts at what they do. So like one guy's like pickpocketing a security guard, and one guy's like, just like perfectly like hurling a kind of like a bit of something so it covers a security camera. And it's just like everybody at the top of their game being super cool about it and yet incredibly precise.
Yeah. Yeah. It is like a murderer's row of musicians, and like you say, like this duality that either they or Zorn has managed to create, where there is clearly a structure. This is a written piece, and the way Zorn works is very much writing music, right. But there's clearly also a hell of a lot of space for improvisation and spontaneity and people creating their own licks. You only have to listen to a couple of different versions of this played in different scenarios to see that they're a band messing around together as well as playing this structured piece of music.
I mean, to my ears, this is a very, very simple structure. It's two chords, isn't it? Is it the tonic and is it like a flat second or something? I can't quite tell.
It's a semitone up. It's I'm currently doing pantomime in Peterborough, and the guy sharing my dressing room, Fred Broom, was listening to it along with me, and he said, "So it's just those two chords, right? Okay, cool. I understand now."
So I mean, it seems to me that it's a very, very simple jam that gives the musicians a lot of space to have fun with it. As long as the groove is going, they can do what they want. And I have to say, I haven't heard other versions of the song. I've only heard this one. I feel like there was a point after about 2 or 3 minutes where Marc Ribot seems to kind of get a bit bored and run out of things to play. Like he's done all of his kind of. I think he's a wonderful guitar player. Obviously, I think about Marc Ribot. He's a beautiful, beautiful man. But I feel like he starts fading in after a bit.
It's interesting because when you look at the this album, Bar Kokhba, is part of John Zorn's Jewish awakening, as it were. He has a Jewish background, and he came to realise that that history, and particularly that musical history, was actually very important to him. Gavur is the fifth, the name of the fifth sphere of the Kabbalistic tree of life. It represents will and judgment, rage, war, creativity, all sorts of stuff. And this album, this double album, has all sorts of spheres and concepts from Jewish faith as track titles. I haven't been into the album in detail, so I can't say how it compares. But there does, when you see him, Zorn, in Spaces and other versions, where he seems to be directing the improvisation, he gives a little gesture and he points to someone else, and he's listed, I think, not as the composer but as the producer on this album.
Yeah, I saw that.
Which I think is a really interesting distinction. And there is something about needing a still centre around which all of this freeform stuff happens.
It's interesting because that reminds me a little of Steve Albini, who he records like bands, like punk bands, rock bands, and he never takes a credit. I think in any extreme circumstances does he take a credit as a producer. He takes a credit if he must, as a recordist or a recorder, someone who is essentially being a witness to the music being recorded.
He's not a recorder player. He's not tooting away in the background.
That's how he gets his 10%. That's how he gets his royalties. No, because he has this view of a producer. That producer comes from a period of music, probably in the 1960s, 1970s, when a band went in and the producer sat down with them and they worked on the arrangements. They told them, where to cut a verse, maybe even help them write a lyric or put down a guitar lick. And he was like, that's not what punk bands need. They're good bands. They don't need somebody kind of sticking their dick into the arrangement. And this is kind of, and I think of that because this is sort of the opposite. This is John Zorn, by saying I'm the producer, respecting his musicians, saying they're making the compositions, they're performing and writing it in the moment because they're improvising things. But I have this role of constructing the final product in the way that I just described, which I think is really interesting, because for what is, for Steve Albini, very disrespectful to say I produced this album. For John Vaughan, he's John Zorn, rather, he's taking a step back and he's being, he's giving credit to his musicians, which I think is really cool.
I think that there's also something which reflects back onto the Tom Waits track as well, because while you get the sense that Waits holds on to his music, not tightly, but he's protective of his music in many ways.
Yep.
There is also Bride of Rain Dog is riffing slightly on the Rain Dog's theme, and Ralph Carney is clearly going at it hard. Like he's there's some, particularly towards the end of that first section of Bride of Rain Dog, he's squeaking and wailing and sounds like he's having a whale of a time. And that duality, that sense of someone who, like Zorn, is writes in a very serious manner. He lives this ascetic lifestyle. Also having the confidence and the generosity to go, there's people out there who I need to trust and rely on and work with, as opposed to have work for me.
I think Waits has a different relationship to his musicians, though. Like, he definitely feel like with that, from what I've read, that Waits treats them as a kind of clay to form his album, and that he'll let them do their thing, and then he'll take it and maybe he'll use it, or maybe he'll use the version where he recorded it on a tape recorder that he had in the studio. So he's not necessarily trying to put across the performance that the musician was making in the studio for themselves. He's trying to work out, how do I fit this in to make something which I want to hear. And he doesn't credit himself, he doesn't credit himself as a producer, except for in the sense that he's a producer and the songwriter and and the performer. So I think he comes from that mold, because that's how he works since the 1970s of having backing musicians, I guess. I suspect he would treat people more respectfully than that in the studio, because you get the sense that there's a lot of freedom for them. But essentially, it's his show. It is his gig. It's not.
And Brennan's.
And Brennan's.
Forward from this point, yeah.
Rain Dogs isn't, as far as the credit goes. Ralph Carney, Tom Waits collaboration, Mark Ribot, Tom Waits collaboration. It's a Tom Waits album.
No. And yet those personalities are so, particularly Ribot, feels so important to the feel
and
of the
just
whole
so
album.
Wonderful. They add so much to it. And I love the collaboration with musicians he has in these albums.
Well, we'll talk more about that, the album as a whole, in our next episode. This is our last episode in collaboration with Ross. Thank you for joining us for some of the tracks.
Oh, no, don't mention it. It was awesome. Thank you.
It's been lovely hanging out.
Yeah, thanks, Ross.
We will be back for the concluding track of Rain Dogs next week. In the meantime, if you have any thoughts about songs that we've dealt with, songs that are coming up, you should get in touch. Our email address is songbysongpodcast@gmail.com.
Or on Twitter, you can contact them at songbysongpod.
You should go to our Facebook page, Song by Song Show, and tell us how much you've enjoyed Ross's podcast, Imaginary Advice.
You should. It's an exciting treat. And all of the information, all the show notes, all of everything can be found at the website songbysongpodcast.com. Till then, I've been Sam Pay.
I've been Ross Sutherland.
And I've been Martin Zoltz-Orstwick.
Aceptamos unos sueldos ridículos para ayudarlas. ¿Y sabes cómo nos lo agradecieron? Echándonos. La ley del dinero. Quien maneja el dinero hace la ley. Cierran un montón de fábricas y se les ve presumiendo por ahí con sus limusinas de mierda. Oye, deberías tener un poco más de paciencia en la vida. Voy hasta las pelotas. Ellos deciden cómo tienes que vivir. Te sitúan en la línea de salida y el nombre del juego es Corre para vivir.
hacia nosotros mismos y hacia los demás. Solamente pensamos en nuestro bienestar. Tenemos están intentando por todos los medios destruir nuestra conciencia.
This is Basics Beats.